it's ancient history. There's no reason, or it's not ancient, but it's for Americans, it's ancient. You know, it's not well known, but um, the Senate passed constitutional amendments 4 or 5 times between 1813 and 1826 to require states to use districts, to abolish uh, winner take all. I mean, it passed in the sense of it had a two-thirds vote or more than a two-thirds vote. And one of those years, I think it was 1821, the House came very close to a two-thirds vote as well. So, so that there might have been a constitutional amendment passed in the early 1820s that would have prohibited winner take all. Um, but it was blocked. It was really blocked uh, by by a certain number of large states who did not want to do that. And then a kind of equilibrium was reached in practice, which was that all states would have popular elections to choose the electors, except South Carolina, which held out until 1858. Um, but all states would have popular elections, and that they would all use winner take all, um, because if many states were using winner take all, or some states were using winner take all, other states didn't want to give up the partisan advantage by just having district elections. And that's, that, to get way ahead of the story, is also why subsequent efforts to switch away from winner take all and towards districts on a state by state basis, which is constitutionally possible, have not had so much success.
So that has been a recurring theme throughout American history, that there have been many efforts to reform or even abolish the Electoral College in favor of a popular vote. Why? I mean, a lot of these you mentioned, they're passed in the House, passed in the Senate. Why have a lot of these have been successful? Why have they all ultimately failed?
Well, it's been different for different measures, but in terms of the efforts to replace the Electoral College with a national popular vote, the failure really has to do with the opposition of the white South. Um, in 1969, a constitutional amendment that would have abolished the Electoral College and replaced it with a national popular vote was passed by, I think it was an 82% vote by the House of Representatives. I mean, that seems so strange to us now, where the current House couldn't get an 82% vote about what day it is. Uh, but they, by an 82% vote, they voted in 1969 to abolish the Electoral College. It then went to the Senate, where it was held up for a while by the chair of the Judiciary Committee, named Allen Eastland, who's a Mississippi planter. This is goes back to my references to committee chairs and their Southern committee chairs and their power. Um, but the foremost advocate of this amendment, Senator Birch Bayh from Indiana, figured out a maneuver around Eastland and eventually got it to the Senate floor, where in the summer and fall of 1970, and it was filibustered. It was filibustered by a group of Southern senators with one Midwestern Republican colleague, Roman Hruska from Nebraska. But it was basically filibustered by Strom Thurmond and Sam Ervin and several other Southern senators. So that, and the reason was, I mean, when you probe into it, the reason was, even though there was a lot going on and had been going on with voting rights and African American voting rights, was that they still, particularly people of that generation, the older generation, perceived the Electoral College to be a real bulwark for defending the rights of the South, because um, it had given Southern states disproportionate power in national politics. Um, so that maintaining racial hierarchies had a great deal to do with these defeats, and That was the story through the 1970s.
Hmm. So what about today? How do we get people to, because people, it seems that they don't really care. I mean, every time the election comes around, especially in 2016 after Trump lost the popular vote but won the electoral college, a lot of people, you know, complained about it. But then it just fades away back into irrelevance. How do we get over this issue? What do you propose that, no one really cares, no one has a compelling reason to change it? What do you think will get us over that hump?
Um, if I knew Jake, I'd bottle it and sell it. It's you know, I think that. Well, let me say a couple of things. It's a there's a kind of since the after that failure in 1970, there was another effort in the 1970s, which had a lot of support, but didn't come close to clearing the Senate again. And since that time, the Republican Party, or most Republicans, but I think even the party itself, has concluded that the Electoral College benefits Republicans, that they have what was called, quotes, a lock on the Electoral College. There have now been two elections in which they won the presidency but lost the popular vote. Uh, um, and they seem adamant about sticking with the electoral college. Um, Although from time to time, many Republicans, even in the last 15 years, have questioned that. I mean, or questioned the virtues of winner take all. This is a long prelude to answering your question about how we get from here to there. Um, I think that, in a certain way, in terms of nitty gritty congressional, I think that there has to be a popular movement, and I've been working with some people to try to see what we can do uh, to build one, and to build one also that will go beyond each election cycle. Every 4 years around this time, we're having a lot of talks about the electoral college, and that will continue into December, maybe into January, depending on what happens, and then it will fade from people's minds. So it's and this rhythm about the appearance of energy for electoral college reform and then it receding. This is commented about in the late 19th century as well. So there's one comment that that's saying something like people are only concerned about the roofs leaking when it's raining, and then the sun comes out and they don't pay any attention. So I think that it will take a movement. It will take some leadership, such as provided some person or persons in Congress who really want to make this their cause and will stick with it. For a while. I mean, I've interviewed members of Congress, and they all seem to think that that's the case. Um, and I think that one other source of possible hope for change is that the fate of the Republican Party is, I think, unclear at this point, in the sense that um, the Republican Party has become something now quite different than it was uh, 10, 15, 20 years ago. A lot of those Republicans are now publicly voting for Kamala Harris. Um, and I don't know whether it will lead to a fracturing of the Republican Party, to the appearance of another sort of center right party that looks like what the Republican Party used to look like. Um, we don't know that. I certainly don't know that. But what I do know is that the times that we have come closest to electoral college reform have been times when the party system was in flux. That was the case in the 18 teens and the 1820s, when basically the original two-party system had disappeared, the Federalists had disappeared, and everything was sort of within some a large amorphous Democratic Republican um, party until the 1830s, when things began to reshape. And I think that one could argue, and I have argued, that uh, in the late 1960s, in the second half of the 1960s, and even the early 1970s, that there really was no longer a two-party system in the United States, that there were three or four parties. I mean, I think that the split between the northern liberal wings of the Democratic Party and the southern conservative wing of the Democratic Party were so severe by 1968 that to think of them as one party was wrong. And there were somewhat analogous splits between what one could call the Goldwater wing of the Republican Party and the Rockefeller wing, for lack of better terms. And I think that when you have uh, shape shifting in the party system and maybe in the structure of the party system, then it becomes sort of much less possible for people to base their position on electoral college reform on a clear cut and predictable partisan calculation. So I think it's possible that we will get into another period like that sometime fairly soon. And that might create more of an opening with the other factors that I mentioned for successful electoral college reform.
That's interesting. So you think there's actually a possibility that in the near future we actually could move away from the two-party system?
Well, or the or the two-party system will get reconfigured in some way. I mean, we have. I mean, the United States is somewhat unusual in having a very durable two parties. I mean, but that's not an accident. It's not because these are such great parties. It's partly because we have laws that are largely unseen that make it difficult for third or fourth parties, and a lot of people are actually working now to try to make it easier for third or fourth parties. But I think that I I mean the question that I ask, and I don't claim any great expertise in this,